My brother smiled while taking everything my grandfather left behind. The house, the land, the money. Even the gold watch Grandpa promised me when I was 12. He sat there in that leather chair like he'd already won. My mother was crying quietly into a tissue. My father kept staring at the floor like if he avoided eye contact long enough, maybe he wouldn't have to admit what was happening. And me? I just sat there, silent. Not because I accepted it, not because I was weak, but because the lawyer hadn't opened the second envelope yet. And when he finally did, my brother stopped smiling. My grandfather wasn't the kind of man people called sweet. He wasn't warm in the way movies try to make old men warm. He didn't hug much. He didn't say "I'm proud of you" every 5 minutes. He didn't hand out compliments like candy. But he was fair, and in my family, fairness was rare enough to feel like love. My older brother Daniel was the golden child from the moment he learned how to talk. Loud, confident, athletic, charming when he wanted to be, and somehow always at the center of every family gathering. If there was a photo being taken, Daniel was in the middle. If there was praise to be given, Daniel got it. If there was blame to be avoided, somehow it skipped right over him. I was the opposite. Quiet. Reserved. The kind of kid adults describe as easy because he learned early that being noticed usually meant being corrected. Daniel could walk into a room and own it. I learned how to disappear in one. Growing up with him felt like living next to a fire. Everyone gathered around him. Everyone made excuses for him. Everyone forgave him before he even apologized. And the worst part? He knew it. He knew exactly how much room he could take before someone told him to stop, because almost nobody ever did. When he wrecked Dad's truck at 19, Dad called it a lesson. When he maxed out Mom's credit card trying to impress some girl in Miami, Mom said he was just figuring life out. When he borrowed money from Grandpa and never paid it back, my family called him ambitious. Ambitious. That was the word they used whenever Daniel did something selfish enough to hurt other people but confident enough to make it sound intentional. If I made one mistake, it became my personality. If Daniel made 10, it became his potential. That's how families like mine work. They don't always destroy you loudly. Sometimes they do it slowly, by deciding over and over again that one child matters more than the other. But Grandpa never treated me like that. When I was younger, he used to let me sit with him on the porch in the evenings, while he drank black coffee and watched the sun disappear behind the trees. He'd tell me stories about his life before the family had money. Stories about sleeping in the back of a butcher shop when he was 17. Stories about working until his hands split open. Stories about saving cash in coffee cans under the floorboards because he didn't trust banks back then. He wasn't trying to impress me. He was trying to teach me something. One time, when I was maybe 13, he looked at me and said, "The loudest man in the room is usually the weakest one." At the time, I thought he was just talking about ego. Years later, I realized he was talking about Daniel. When Grandpa got sick, everything changed, at least for me. For Daniel, it changed only when there was something to gain. I was the one taking Grandpa to appointments. I was the one organizing his medications, helping him up the stairs, fixing things around the house, making sure he had groceries, sitting with him through the long, quiet evenings when he didn't have the energy to talk much. I didn't do any of that because I expected anything from him. I did it because he was the only person in my family who had ever made me feel like I wasn't an afterthought. Daniel, on the other hand, suddenly became very interested in family the moment doctors started using words like decline in long-term care. Before that, he barely visited. Missed birthdays. Missed holidays. Missed check-ins. But once Grandpa's health became serious, Daniel started showing up with fake concern in his voice and a smile that always looked half a second too late. He'd bring coffee he knew Grandpa couldn't drink. He'd ask if there was anything he could do. Then, when no one was looking, he'd start asking the real questions. "Do you know where Grandpa keeps his legal papers? Did he ever update the property documents? Who's handling the estate?" At first, I tried to tell myself I was overthinking it, that maybe he was just trying to be responsible. But Daniel had never been responsible a day in his life. He was curious for one reason only: money. One night, about 3 weeks before Grandpa died, I stayed over because he'd had a rough day. He was weaker than usual. His hands trembled when he lifted his tea. His voice had gone quieter, thinner somehow, like it had to work harder just to reach the room. I helped him sit down in the den, and for a while, we just stared at the fireplace without saying anything. Then, out of nowhere, he said something that stayed with me. He said, "People show you who they are when they think the ending is close." I looked over at him and asked what he meant. He didn't answer right away. He just gave this small, tired smile, then reached toward the side table drawer and rested his hand on a sealed envelope. Cream-colored paper, red wax seal. He didn't hand it to me. He just touched it for a second, then closed the drawer. I almost asked about it, but I didn't. 3 days later, the drawer was empty. Grandpa died on a Thursday morning. The funeral was on Saturday. By Monday, Daniel was already moving like a man who thought he had inherited not just property, but authority. He was making calls, talking to people, asking Dad for keys, asking me if I knew where Grandpa kept important items, asking whether I had seen the watch. The watch mattered, not because it was expensive, although it probably was, but because when I was 12, Grandpa had taken it off his wrist, held it in his palm for a second, and said, "One day this goes to you." Daniel had heard him say it too. So when he started asking about it after the funeral, I knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't grieving, he was inventorying. And then came the first thing that made me realize how ugly this was about to get. 3 days after the funeral, I drove over to Grandpa's house to pick up some framed family photos and a box of old letters he once told me I could keep. The locks had been changed. I just stood there staring at the front door, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then Daniel walked around from the side yard holding a coffee cup like he'd been there all morning. He looked at me, barely surprised, and said, "You should have called first." I asked him why the locks were changed. He shrugged and said, "Precaution. There are valuables inside." Valuables, like I was some stranger trying to rob the place. I asked who gave him the right to do that. He took a sip of coffee and said, "Someone has to be responsible." That was Daniel's favorite thing about being protected his whole life. Eventually, he started confusing permission with entitlement. A week later, we all sat in the lawyer's office. My mother was nervous. My father looked exhausted. Daniel looked confident in the way people do when they think the universe has already signed the paperwork in their favor. The lawyer's name was Mr. Holloway. Older guy, calm voice, sharp eyes. The kind of man who doesn't waste words because he doesn't need to. He adjusted his glasses, opened the file in front of him, and started reading Grandpa's will. At first, it was normal. And me? I didn't react. Not because it didn't hurt. It did. It hit me like someone had reached inside my chest and confirmed every fear I'd carried since childhood. That I was always second. Always less. Always the one people could overlook without consequence. But underneath that pain, there was something else. Confusion. Because Grandpa was many things. But careless wasn't one of them. He would never spend years showing me exactly who I was to him, only to leave me scraps without a reason. It didn't make sense. Daniel stood up, adjusted his jacket, and said, "Well, I've got a house to prepare for sale." Sale. That word hit me harder than the will. He wasn't even going to keep it. He was going to gut the last thing Grandpa built and turn it into cash. That's when Mr. Holloway finally spoke again. Before anyone leaves, Daniel stopped. "There is one more item." The room changed instantly. Daniel slowly turned around. Mr. Holloway reached into a locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a sealed envelope. Cream-colored paper, red wax seal. The exact envelope I had seen in Grandpa's drawer weeks earlier. My chest tightened. Mr. Holloway looked directly at Daniel and said, "Your grandfather instructed me to open this only if the first will produced a specific outcome." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" Mr. Holloway ignored him and opened the envelope. Then he began reading. "If you are hearing this," he said, "then my concerns were justified." The room went dead still. Mr. Holloway turned the page. This document serves as a conditional override to my primary will. Daniel stepped forward. What? Mr. Holloway kept reading. Over the final months of my life, I documented repeated attempts by one grandson to pressure me regarding my estate, my property, and my financial decisions. I looked at Daniel. For the first time in his life, he looked afraid. Mr. Holloway continued. I also became aware that a key to my study had been used without my permission, and that documents were removed or disturbed from their original locations. My mother covered her mouth. My father finally looked up. Daniel opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Then Mr. Holloway read the sentence that changed everything. The initial version of my will was designed as a character test. Daniel just stared at him. A test. Grandpa had tested him. And Daniel had failed before he even made it out of the room. Mr. Holloway kept going. If Daniel attempts to claim, sell, transfer, or exercise control over any part of my estate before this letter is opened. He paused. Then all assets, property rights, account holdings, and family heirlooms are to be immediately and irrevocably transferred to my other grandson, Ethan. Silence. Not the normal kind. The kind that lands like impact. Daniel stared at him like the language had suddenly become impossible to understand. Then he said the only thing people like him say when reality finally stops bending for them. No. Just that. No. Then louder. No. That's not legal. That's insane. Mr. Holloway calmly slid another folder across the desk. It is legal, he said. It was notarized, witnessed, and filed 3 months ago. Daniel looked at my father like he expected backup. None came. He looked at my mother. She was crying again, but this time it wasn't grief. It was shame. Then Mr. Holloway said, "There is also a personal note." He unfolded a smaller page and read, "To Ethan. The watch is in the blue box beneath the false bottom of my desk drawer. I told you once it would be yours. I meant it. That broke me more than the house. More than the money, more than the estate, because it wasn't just proof that Grandpa had seen what Daniel was doing. It was proof that he had seen me. Completely. Accurately. Without needing me to fight for it. Daniel didn't yell after that. That was the strangest part. He just stood there, frozen, like his whole identity had been built around the assumption that confidence could always outrun consequence. And for the first time in his life, it couldn't. He left the office without saying goodbye. Didn't look at me. Didn't look at our parents. Just walked out. My mother tried calling him later that night. He didn't answer. My father sat in silence for almost an hour, before finally saying, "I think we failed both of you." And for once, nobody argued. A week later, I stood alone in Grandpa's house with his gold watch in my hand. Same porch, same chair, same evening light stretching across the yard. And I finally understood what he had meant that night by the fireplace. People show you who they are when they think the ending is close. Daniel showed us exactly who he was. Grandpa just made sure he was the last one to realize he had already lost. And if there's one thing I learned from all of it, it's this. Sometimes revenge doesn't look like screaming. It doesn't look like fighting. It doesn't even look like payback. Sometimes, it looks like the truth arriving at exactly the right time.